Is Facebook manipulating and controlling the information that gets to us? How do they do this? Today, from OCON 2019, we have the opportunity of speaking with someone that was inside of Facebook, rebelled from Facebook, and now is doing his own projects. He is Brian Amerige. He is the former senior engineering manager, and now he's co-founder of a new project called Thoughtful. So Brian, what happened first in your life, Facebook or objectivism?
Definitely objectivism. So, I mean, I discovered Ayn Rand through Atlas Shrugged probably when I was, I guess, 15 or 16 years old when I was in high school. I had an aunt of mine recommend I read Atlas Shrugged, and the way I think she put it was, this is a book that smart people read.
Right.
I don't know if she had read the book herself or not, or like, I think it was really just like, this is a book I know that smart people really love to read.
Right.
And so she gave it to me. And I don't know if I read it right away or it took me a little while. But as soon as I started reading it, it was just like, oh my gosh, there's an entire philosophy that really understands how heroic businessmen are. And at the time, I was starting a company, a small software company in high school, and that was a real struggle to do that while I was in high school, and sort of had a lot of people telling me like, "Oh no, you're wasting your time. You're throwing away all this schooling that you've done to start this company." And I felt like I was on my own in a way, but I knew that this is what I wanted to do, and it was a business I wanted to build, and just the heroism that you see on display in Atlas Shrugged, and the way that they really value independence through the plot just completely absorbed me, and I read everything pretty much that Rand wrote after that.
Wow. Yeah. And you're also an OCON regular, right? Yeah.
So I've been here, I don't know if this is my fourth or fifth or sixth. I actually don't even know when my first one was, but I didn't actually go to OCON until quite a bit after. I considered myself an objectivist and was a huge reader of everything that she had written. So in the panel with Dave Rubin, you spoke about how the culture in Facebook changed. Tell us a little bit where were the difference, like when you started, when you left? Yeah, so I mean, when I joined, it was, I would describe the culture as essentially apolitical.
What year was that?
2012, okay. 2012. And so, the company was it was a lot smaller then. I mean, the company was probably about 1,500 employees. And then when I left, it was close to 35,000.
Just to be like in the timeline, do you remember that movie, Social Network?
Yes.
Yeah? Are you there? Is there like a character of you there?
No, there's no character of me. It wasn't that early.
Right.
That was the very early days of Facebook.
Right. So that movie stops, let's say, in what year?
I mean, that had to stop probably in 2006,
okay.
Around 2006, 2007. So this was about 5 years after.
Right, okay.
But I mean, it was still, at this, just to give you a sense of how early even it still was, like when I joined Facebook, there was no iPhone app.
Right.
And so part of my first project when I joined the company actually was helping build the first native iPhone app on the platform. But yeah, I mean, it was essentially an apolitical place where people were really, really ruthlessly focused on Facebook's mission and what it meant to translate that onto something that was on, in the palm of your hand and not just on a computer, on a website. And I was an objectivist when I joined, and people knew that, and that wasn't a problem. I mean, Facebook. They push people to bring their authentic selves to work, and part of that for me was like I was an objectivist and I have these views, and people were fine about that. It wasn't really until probably around 2015, 2016, so 3 to 4 years later, that, and particularly as the United States presidential elections that cycle was heating up, that cultural push to bring your authentic self to work meant that, as everything was kind of becoming more political outside of the company, you're telling people to bring their authentic selves to work. People bring their politics to work. And in Facebook, which is an overwhelmingly sort of left-leaning company for a variety of reasons, that meant people were bringing often far left-leaning politics to work, and it showed up in all sorts of ways.
Now, why do you think that happened? Because the first president who used social media to politicize was Obama, right?
Yep.
And it seems to me that, okay, because what, he was Democrat, everything is cool, but now that we have the threat of Trump winning, then 2015, and social media becomes this hostile environment for conservative libertarian ideas or like diversity to join. Why do you think there's a difference in between, okay, if it's with Obama, it's cool that he uses social media, but if it's with Trump, things completely radically change?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things going on there. For one, it's definitely the case that Facebook internally was much more comfortable with Obama using the platform to further his success than they were with Trump securing a nomination and then eventually becoming president.
Right.
So that's definitely true. And so there was a lot more, I'd say, discomfort and introspection internally about like, oh, what role are we playing about this? And then obviously from outside the company, you're getting tons. I mean, Facebook has written about like thousands of stories a day, basically. And so you get tons and tons of feedback all the time from the press and from all these different interest groups. And so it's a matter of what you take seriously and what you actually pay attention to inside the company from that giant inbound pool of requests you're getting from the outside world. And so because people, I think, were more sensitive about it, about Trump using the platform, I think that made people a little bit more sensitive about it. But there is another element to it too, which is, it took a while for Facebook's content policy, which is the policy that governs what's allowed and not allowed on the platform, to evolve to have much broader hate speech provisions and provisions that are, written under the guise of protecting people that are actually, and my perspective on them is that they're not really about protecting people. They're really about enforcing particular perspectives, and their definition of what's safe and not safe comes from a political perspective. And it took a couple of years from Obama to Trump for that content policy to sort of incorporate a political perspective on what it meant to keep people safe, which was left-leaning.
And what about Mark Zuckerberg? Does he have a philosophy, a political ideology? Does his personal opinion is what guides Facebook?
I mean, he definitely does. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I do have a tremendous amount of respect for him for a lot of reasons. I'd say historically, I would have described him much more as a libertarian.
What?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that's
How
become...
libertarian?
I mean, particularly
legalizing drugs.
I think he was okay with that.
And then ending the welfare?
See, not as much there. So it's like, and I'll tell you exactly what the parameterization of like where his libertarianism sort of stopped.
Okay, he's not a libertarian anymore.
I don't think he'd describe himself that way anymore. I think.
Okay.
But he used to be, it was particularly on the economic side, like in favor of the government and the economy being like pretty separate. And obviously he runs a big business, and he was very sensitive to the concerns of what it's like to run a big company. But I think what's happened over time with him is, as Facebook became more and more successful, I don't think he ever had a deeply moral understanding of whether what he had created in Facebook was good or not.
Right, like a Frankenstein, and then you don't know what to do.
I mean, to some degree that, but even more so, a lot of people have this idea in their head that like when you make a lot of money, you have to give back, and that you owe the world something because you've been given billions of dollars, right?
Right.
And I don't, and that perspective, I think, informs a lot of how he thought about Facebook's role in the world, in a sense, where as Facebook became more and more successful, and you've got these interest groups saying like, oh, I don't feel safe and I feel threatened by this or offended by this or oppressed by this, he felt like he had to oblige those concerns in a way, because this was a platform that like had given him so much, and he like this is this perspective of like, well, you're so small and you're being hurt by this, and I'm so big and I've been given so much. Of course, I'm gonna I feel guilty about it in a way, and I'm going to try to give back by being sensitive to those concerns. So I think a lot of Facebook's behavior and Mark's behavior you can understand through the lens of not really having the moral pride he ought to have in what Facebook has become and his role in creating it.
Do you think he at least tries to find clarity? Like, does he invest in emotional intelligence, in finding a right philosophy, in trying to understand, you know, like Spider-Man says, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. So we would all be more, you know, like relaxed if at least we knew that someone like Mark Zuckerberg or, you know, big businessmen are investing in trying to have a philosophy that is coherent to the power that they have.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of what I mean by, like, he's one of the smartest people that I've ever met. He takes ideas very seriously, and like one of these things that is just sort of somewhat of a cultural tradition around Mark at Facebook is that his desk is always filled with books. He's got a desk at Facebook, sort of, you know, he's not just sort of holed up in an office. Yeah. And one of the traditions that Facebook always had was that if you wanted to give Mark a book for him to read, like, you just put it on his desk, and like, he's a voracious reader, and cool. He reads a lot of them. And so, you know, he takes ideas seriously. He takes learning very seriously. I can't say with confidence that the result of that has been something that, you know, where he'll 100% of the time change his mind about something that he thinks is wrong. There have definitely been a couple occasions I've seen in the past where it would be very inconvenient for him and Facebook to change their thinking on an issue, and I'm not so sure that he still really deeply believes it's the right thing, but there are other reasons for him to continue in that direction.
So what changed? Because what you're describing is like a very invigorating work environment where everyone is welcome to be different, diverse. Mark as a boss that is concerned about, you know, learning and do good to the world. Why then you decided to leave?
Well, there's a lot that went into it. So I mean, I think one aspect that's really important to understand is just that Facebook is now a very big company. And so when I joined, it was about 1,500 employees. I think when I left, it was something close to 33,000. Okay, wow. So it's many, many times bigger.
In 4 years?
It's 7 years. So I was there for 7 years.
Yeah.
And what that essentially means, though, is that there's a lot more to the way Facebook operates than Mark. And you know, the way Facebook operates is, you know, Facebook is not a terrifically top-down company. They value independence and autonomy in the leaders inside the company a lot. And what that means is, you know, it doesn't actually, I mean, it matters how good Mark is on these issues, but it's not, if the people between a given low-level employee and Mark like all feel a particular way on an issue, even if they disagree with him, like, chances are you're probably not going to see his vision of what the case is.
I see this everywhere in Latin American companies. Like, the big boss can have clarity in ideas, but the medium ranks are cronies, are socialists, and then everything just doesn't go through.
Yep. No, and that's a lot of, I think, what Facebook is seeing right now, where, you know, I think Mark is actually a lot better than most of the rest of the company on issues of content policy, on issues of culture, on issues of, he's one of the biggest advocates of like having diverse political perspectives and intellectual perspectives in the company. And yet, you know, the thing, you know, my criticism has always been there, though, he did not stand up strongly enough against the ideas that he disagreed with and knew were deeply wrong. And so, you know, when you see many employees in the company acting in a way where they're harassing employees that have different ideas just because they are, you know, not left-leaning, where they're, you know, lobbing ad hominems around, calling people racists and bigots and transphobes and
like
sexists.
Bullying in high school.
Oh yeah, just like high school bullying. And you know, it's one thing to sort of say like, oh, that's not who we are, or we shouldn't be doing that. It's another thing to actually say like, look, that is unacceptable behavior at this company, and if you do it, you'll be fired. Right. And actually fire the people. And I don't, you know, I think there's definitely a mob mentality that forms around these issues. When, you know, if you take an example If one person calls another person a transphobe, for example, on some discussion inside the company, there's definitely a mob mentality that happens where other people will just sort of hop on that issue, and that kind of mob behavior becomes very dangerous. And the only way to shut it down is to make it clear that it's unacceptable and it's not welcome at the company, and that's more than just words. It means getting rid of the people that do it.
What about religion? Is Mark an atheist? Is he? Because in Latin America, I see a lot of bullying inside of Facebook, from atheist fan pages to religious fan pages, people saying and insulting all the time, one way and the other. And because it's in Spanish, like, I can see a complete difference on the way Facebook controls the United States, because it's an English, English speaking, and this is Mark's country. But in Latin America, sometimes, like, you get banned, or you cannot publish for the next 3 days, just because some troll center of a government starts denouncing your posts. But then you see things that fly by, because there's no control with the language, right?
Yeah, well, so this is kind of the very sad thing in a way. And one of my biggest criticisms of Facebook's content policy is that it is completely impractical at the scale that Facebook operates. And the content policy is, not only is it obtuse and difficult to understand and incredibly vague, but the actual implementation, I'll give you a sense of like how does this actually get enforced at scale on Facebook? And the way it actually works is, somebody reports something on Facebook, or it's identified automatically as hate speech in some way, and it goes into a queue of posts to essentially be processed. And they're processed by a team of about 15,000 people all around the world, who essentially work in call centers. And when I say call centers, I literally mean these are buildings that were previously call centers, often staffed by people who were call center employees.
And this is worldwide.
This is worldwide. Okay. And what happens in these call centers is that these people, who predominantly do not speak English, are using Google Translate to translate rules that are written in English into their native language, and then given 8 to 10 seconds to make a up or down decision on whether a post is okay.
Wow.
That is the actual way this is implemented, and it's insane. And you can imagine that when you have a system like that, when you have unbelievably vague rules that even people in English do not understand, and then you have 15,000, essentially low-level, poorly paid, non-English speaking employees translating the content into their language and then making a decision in 8 seconds. The reliability of the decisions they're making is it's nothing. I think it's actually worse than random.
Right. So with all these problems, and you start noticing this culture, this bullying culture, but also how Facebook is getting out of control, you decide to speak up, right? And you write your personal experience, and someone leaks it, right? Yeah.
So the backstory here is I had no intention of having this become a conversation outside of the company. What I actually wanted to do was you
were not like the devil wears Prada kind of.
No, I thought this was, I thought the content policy, everything I just told you about that process, I was like, that's not going to scale. This is crazy. This is really, really bad for the company. It's going to really hurt us in the long run, and it's going to make it harder for us to actually do our mission. And I wanted to talk about that issue, and what I found was that when I criticized that policy, I was called a hate monger, I was called a sexist, I was called a bigot, because who criticizes a hate speech policy? Right. You must be hateful.
Right.
And so I realized I can't even talk about this issue without all of this crap being thrown at me. And so that's why I wrote the memo. I was like, okay, we have a real problem with dealing with political diversity and different intellectual perspectives, where we can't even talk about issues that are really important to the way we're running this company.
Were there others that thought like you?
There were a lot of other people that thought like me, but very few people who were willing to actually say anything about it. And one of the things that happened, and
you were the John Galt in that moment. That's good.
That's very flattering. One of the things that happened when I wrote that memo was that I got hundreds of private messages from people. And I mean, from executives in the company to people who had just joined that day. Right. And they were basically saying, look, I will never admit this publicly. I will never say this to anyone else, but I agree with what you're saying 100%.
It happens to me as well in Latin America. It's like the support is always silent and the hate is always public. It's always like that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly
so what
right.
happened then?
So, I mean, the memo I wrote kind of got a lot of attention inside the company. And it developed an interesting controversy inside the company. And then about a week after I wrote it, I got a message from somebody saying, hey, you're on the front page of the New York Times.
What?
And I was like, and I actually didn't even get this message until probably about 45 minutes after they sent that. And so then my inbox was just sort of blowing up at the time. And it basically, it amped the level of attention to this memo inside the company up to 11, because it was like, there were a lot of people who didn't even have a chance to see it inside the company, and then they read about it in the Times.
Right.
And so it just amplified the attention on the issue. It very quickly got the attention of senior Facebook leaders, so the executive team at Facebook, and they started talking to me about some of the issues, and there was a whole lot. I mean, there were death threats and things like that they had to sort through. And yeah, that kind of thing.
And then?
So I mean, it became a very active discussion inside the company.
Did Mark call you?
Mark did not call me, but some people who work very closely with him did. And they were very interested in understanding my experience and my perspective and what I thought that they ought to do. And what I very quickly found was that they took the cultural issue of political diversity very seriously, but they had a very strong perspective on the content policy issues that for me were the motivating factor. Like that's why I wanted to have those conversations. So one of the things that I was able to understand really, really quickly, because I was suddenly in the room with all these, the highest level executives in the company essentially, was that I was able to essentially talk about the content policy issue with people who were taking it really seriously. And so on one hand, they wanted to work very closely on how to fix the cultural issues. On the other hand, it was exceedingly clear that they were going to continue in this dangerous direction.
We care so much that we're not going to do anything.
It felt like that a little bit. I mean, it was, I get they have this perspective that they can innovate their way out of any problem.
Right.
And they iterate their way out of any problem. And it's like a very Silicon Valley-like way of thinking, where they're saying, it doesn't matter how hard it is, we can take what we've got and keep working on it and keep pushing and keep throwing attention and money at it, and we can fix it. And that's true of a lot of things, and I admire that perspective generally. But this content policy that Facebook has is not one of those things. It's like when you have a policy, hate speech, where hate is essentially a subjective feeling that's up to the accuser to define, to call it when they see it.
Right.
And you're building this gigantic policy that's implemented in this crazy way that I talked about. Like there's no amount of iteration that's ever going to make that work.
Oh, of course.
So
that's why you then decided to leave. That's
right. I mean, as soon as I basically got to the point where I was like, yeah, you guys are committed to that direction and enforcing a hate speech policy that way, I decided to leave the company and figure out what was next.
And now you're doing your own thing, and I want to talk a little bit about Thoughtful. But before, I want to tell you a little bit about my personal experience with Facebook, and maybe you can give me some advice.
Sure.
So I started my Facebook account in 2007, when Facebook was completely different. And then I had a radio show in 2010, and I was quite known in Guatemala. It was in a pop music station because I was throwing libertarian and objectivist ideas to young people. So I had a friend working in Microsoft, and he was like, dude, you should open a fan page. And I was like, what? What a narcissistic thing to do. Who the hell opens a fan page? This is 2010, right?
Yeah.
Even in the US, having a fan page was, for like rock stars. In Guatemala, it was like, who has a fan page? And he was like, everything that you say on the radio for 3 hours, like scholarship opportunities, books that you recommend, can live there 24 hours forever for whoever wants to access it. And I was like, yeah, sure. But I don't feel comfortable with that. Like, He opens it for me. He calls me and he's like, I opened you the fan page and I put $100. So we see how it goes. And I was like, dude, no. And he's like, listen, Gloria, what you're doing is really good. Trust me. But by this point, of course, it's 2010. You can recognize that the company was a completely different thing than what it is today, right? So by the end of the first year, I have 6,000 fans. By 2014, I have 25,000 fans, organic. After that $100 that he put, my page just started growing organically. Yeah. Not because I had the coolest posts or the coolest videos or production. It was because I engaged in responding to people, both insults and good comments. Yep. And Facebook became my personal mental chess. It became the way that I forced myself into always responding with arguments. Even when there were attacks, I would start suggesting books. And I was like, thank you for your insult. That means that you don't have any arguments against mine. So people start going to my page because it was fun for them to watch how I was like debating, using this platform to debate the battle of ideas that Hayek and Rand and Mises and all, these people say, this is what we need to do to change the culture. Okay, so that was going on. It was going really good. And in 2014, I go to Spain, to this parliament, and I give a speech. And the parliament puts the speech in YouTube. By this point, I don't have a YouTube account. I only had a Twitter account that was also growing. And 25,000 fans, all of them from Guatemala. No one else knows me anywhere else. But when they put this speech on YouTube, the thing goes viral. Yeah, I saw it. Like your New York Times thing, right? Yeah. And I start getting messages from all over Latin America, Argentina, Venezuela, Miami. Well, Miami is not Latin America, but it's like our New York, right? Honduras, here and there. And they were like, we want to know more about your ideas. And I passed from being this crazy libertarian talking in the radio in Guatemala to a crazy libertarian that now everyone wants to listen and what are these ideas, right? So from one moment to the next, my page grows from 25,000 Guatemalan fans to 250,000 from all over Latin America in like 3 days. Mm-hmm. And that I had to get the task. Do I give this away? Do I keep working like I've been working? And I decided to keep it the way I was doing it. Yeah. And I have more than 1,000 answers because pretty much everyone asked the same crap, right? Yeah. Free markets are immoral, being selfish is bad. So by the end, you see that most of the people, it doesn't matter if they're from Argentina or Colombia or whatever, or what age they have, they always ask the same questions. So if you organize yourself into answering, it can go pretty good. As of today, I have 700,000 people on Facebook. I have like 300,000 on Twitter. I open Instagram, I have like 100,000. My situation with YouTube is a disaster because I basically invested in my Facebook, not monetarily, but like with time. And in YouTube, people grab my videos from Facebook and they put it in their channels in YouTube. So I never got into the wave of YouTube. Like you can find me everywhere, but I have now a channel, but it's impossible to make it grow because, since 2014, there are videos everywhere. But what I've noticed in all these years is, first, when I went big, the troll centers of the dictatorships in Latin America are super well organized. And they have thousands of kids in call centers that their only task is bringing down pages like mine. The other thing I notice is that this exponential growth has stagnated. For the past 7 months, my page doesn't grow as it grew before, even though that I keep doing conferences and going places. I don't know. I don't have a way to prove it, but I don't know if I'm being punished like Dave Rubin and John Stossel and Prager University and everyone that speaks about ideas that are not left-wing. Yeah. What do you think is going on there?
I mean, it's really hard to say, I think, at the highest level without, getting into your page and actually seeing everything.
Right.
There are a couple of things I can imagine going on, though. The first is that I mentioned that the way Facebook's content policy works is that people report things and that goes into a queue, and that's related. I mean, that's essentially how they decide what stays up and what stays down.
Right.
One of the mechanisms that's used, I believe this is still true, in ranking what, the order of content in newsfeed that people see, is how trustworthy essentially like a given page is. And if you're constantly being reported and you're going into that queue where the moderators have to make a decision,
right,
that's going to affect, and again, I don't know if this is still true. This has been a while since I've looked at this on Facebook, and I obviously don't know how it works anymore. But that could affect, I think, essentially like how you rank against other content in newsfeed, because you would be reported a lot by either those troll farms or just by people who disagree with you.
Right.
That's certainly, and that's a flaw in the way that ranking works. The second thing that could be going on, which is less politically oriented and just sort of more of a fact of reality about how Facebook works, is that, so the reason that news feed on Facebook is ranked at all, and ranked essentially means sorted in some way, and on Facebook it's sorted by what Facebook thinks is going to be the most engaging, and what they think is going to be the most engaging is now a lot more complicated than what it used to be.
Right.
But the reason they have to do that is because for every position of a story in newsfeed, there's so many alternatives that could be there, essentially, such that you could never see all the potential stories that could be in any given space. It doesn't make a difference how long you scroll. There are thousands of stories that could be in every single spot. Right. And what's happened over time as Facebook has grown and there's just been more content on Facebook is that there's just been so much more competition in newsfeed for every space, that someone's going to. So basically, the amount of time the number of stories that someone consumes on Facebook hasn't grown at the same rate as the number of stories that we could show you, or Facebook could show you, in newsfeed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so what happens as a result of that is that Facebook has to make a decision then about what kind of content do we want to prioritize, because we can't show everything.
Right.
And one of the things that they found was that, and this is, not just through research, but also was sort of through top level decisions about who do we want to be as Facebook, what do we want people to be using Facebook for. One of the things that Facebook changed over the last couple of years is that they shifted more toward content that comes from your friends and your family,
right,
versus content that comes from pages and organizations that you like and things like that. And just shifting the kind of knob in that direction means that the organic reach of a given page goes down over time.
Right.
Even though it has, like, in putting aside the potential political reasons that could be changing, pretty much every page has seen organic reach go down over time.
So basically, either I start paying Facebook or I open an account in Thoughtful. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is a really early project, and I'm not gonna tell you too much about it.
Okay.
But I'll tell you a little bit about how we're thinking about it. So one of the reasons that I joined Facebook as an employee in the first place was that I saw how important it was to be able to get an idea out of your head and in front of the world, and that communication technologies that increase the speed with which an idea can get out of your head and out into the world sort of underlies like almost every improvement in quality of life you can imagine, like whether it's related to healthcare or education or philosophy, just giving people the ability to move an idea around the world. It matters a lot. And so that's always been, like, for me, the most fascinating part of these social platforms or communication technologies, is the ability to get an idea out of your head. And part of it from an objectivist perspective is, I want the greatest ideas to have a chance in the world and to have a chance to change the way that people think. And what I saw over time was that wasn't working so well at Facebook, and it was increasingly becoming a place that wasn't all that good for ideas. And I eventually realized that Facebook is it's really, really good at helping you connect with your friends and family, and not so good at at helping move great ideas around the world.
Right.
And it's really not built for that in a way.
And that's a great slogan for Thoughtful, by the way.
Well, we're trying to be the platform for ideas.
Right.
And, you know, our approach to doing that is I think pretty different than how a lot of other people are coming at this. And so, you know, what a lot of other people today are thinking is, oh, we need sort of a version of Facebook or YouTube that isn't going to censor ideas. That's, you know, and I agree with that. I think that that's true. I think the idea like that you do want to have a diversity of perspective that's really important. But we look at it a little bit more fundamentally than that, and we say, you know, the reason that you want access to all these different ideas is so that you can find the best ones, and so that on an issue that you're trying to figure out, that's complicated, that's controversial, and it doesn't have to be about politics, it doesn't have to be about philosophy, it could be about something like, you know, like nutrition, how you eat, like what kind of diet do I eat? That's a complicated issue. It seems like the right answer to that changes every 6 months.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's really hard to find the greatest thinking on the internet on these kinds of issues. But it exists. So there's gold out there, but it's very, very hard to find. And so what we're building is a platform that helps you find the greatest thinking on these complicated, controversial issues. And we've got a whole bunch of interesting ways of doing that.
Well, count me in. I think that what you're doing is precisely what John Galt did, taking away from a rotten society the good elements, the motors that are the ideas at the end. The good ideas are the motors of the great realities, right? So I think that definitely there's demand for a social media platform where ideas are the priority, not the connections, not the gossip, but ideas. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
I could be talking with you for hours, but unfortunately we run out of time. So thank you very much, Brian, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.